So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Chiltern Teaching School Hub RQT session. We have Jessica Elford with us today, delivering a session on primary PE. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Jess.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jess Elford. I'm a head of school and a specialist leader in education for PE and maths, which are two of some people's favourite subjects. We're going to run through a few things today. If there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Okay, so today we're going to cover what is PE and the purpose of us teaching it to our children, some barriers to learning and how we can remove these. And then we're going to look at the three pillars of the PE curriculum. So it's to do with progression and how we ensure progression happens from early years all the way through to year 6 and beyond. And then we're going to look at a lesson structure. Now, this lesson structure is what I can only describe as a fail-safe lesson structure that I've used before. And it allows you to use a skill, learn a new skill, refine the skill, and then evaluate towards the end. So it encompasses everything you need within the one PE lesson to ensure it's a good quality PE lesson and the children get the most out of it. So just a little bit about me, because some of you might be wondering why I'm here. I'm an ex-gymnast, ex-national gymnast and a swimmer. I've been was a PE coordinator for over 10 years. I've completed my level 5 and 6 primary AFP PE qualification. I've gained the AFP quality mark with distinction at my previous school. And as I've said, I'm also a head of school and an SLE for PE and maths. So I do lots of support work within schools. So to start off with, we're just going to think a little bit around what is PE. Now, PE encompasses, the teaching of a physical skill, which allows the children to be able to move effectively and then apply it to an activity that they're doing. PE is not the same as school sport, and it is not the same as physical activity, and we'll come on to that in a little while. Now, I really, really like this quote. This is from a blogger who is also an assistant head teacher. And what he does is he takes the Ofsted research frameworks and he puts them into a really nice, concise way of gathering that information. And they're really, really good to read if you're interested in a particular subject. And he says that the aim of PE is not to prepare elite athletes, it is to enable children to flourish at each stage of their education. And we know that physical education and physical health has a massive impact on mental health and well-being through lots of research and studies that have happened over the last few years. So, as I said, physical education is not the same as school sport, and it is not the same as physical activity. So I've broken it down into 3 different areas for you, just to make it a bit clearer and a bit easier. So think of physical education as the teaching of the knowledge and skills of a particular sport or a particular type of activity that you want the children to do. Okay, that's your actual education time within the school curriculum time. School sport, think of that as your extracurricular offer. So your extracurricular clubs, your sports activities, your tournaments, anything you do outside of the physical education environment. And physical activity is your movement throughout the day. So think of things like your school might be doing a golden mile or a daily mile. Things like BBC Super Movers counts as physical activity, and Go Noodle as well. BBC Super Movers is a brilliant resource to ensure that children are having lots of time being physically active throughout the school day. They have lots of really brilliant dance videos that are linked to lots of areas of the curriculum, and we use them quite a lot in my school for maths, for teaching times tables, and for teaching addition and subtraction facts. So I would highly recommend you go and have a look at those. So the purpose, the national curriculum says the purpose of the study is it inspires all children to succeed and excel in competitive sport and other physically demanding activities. Okay, now not all children are going to want to take part in school tournaments and those types of things, but we should be encouraging those children to want to take part in those types of activities, not necessarily at that level, but things like sports days, competitions within house teams within schools. It should provide opportunities for children to be physically confident that supports their health and fitness. So as well as the physical aspect of it, you should also be teaching the children about the impact that exercise has on their bodies and their well-being and their mental health, and how a healthy diet supports all of those things. So there's lots of crossovers with other areas of the curriculum there. We also use PE to embed values such as fairness and respect. Now, children have had a really tricky couple of years post-COVID, and this is something that PE can be used really effectively for. So rebuilding those social skills, rebuilding the idea of winning and losing and fairness and competitive sport, but being respectful to each other. So I just want you to spend a couple of minutes noting down as many different benefits of PE that you can think of. So why do we teach it? What are the benefits going to be for our children? Okay, so as we've already touched upon, there are lots of benefits for the teaching of PE, okay, for your children. These are some of them, they are not all of them, okay. Social skills, as I've explained, children have had a very, very tricky couple of years. PE allows them to feel part of a team. It allows them to develop those communication skills between each other, particularly when playing team games. It also enables children to be a bit more empathetic. So, for example, when giving feedback, it is constructive, but they are sympathetic and empathetic to other people's feelings. It develops, quite obviously, their physical fitness levels. Their mental health is impacted and it is improved. It allows children to have an understanding of the rules, not just the rules of PE, the rules of sort of society, and the rules that are the expectations of behaviour. I always say when I do my training to postgrad and undergrad students, if you can get behaviour right in a PE lesson with those children, your behaviour management strategies will be nailed. They will be fine in the classroom or in the PE hall. It also allows children to develop their resilience and determination. They aren't going to be able to get a skill right on the first attempt, just as they're not going to be able to do column method in maths the first time they do it. But it allows them to develop that resilience and that determination to ensure that they succeed. Research has also shown that strong PE in primary and secondary schools allows good habits to be developed for life. So if children are physically active and enjoy their PE in primary and secondary schools, it allows them to be develop those habits that go on past that. So they're more likely to be more active once they leave school and keep that lifestyle going. So we're going to move on now to some of the barriers, because I know lots of teachers find the barriers in PE quite daunting and quite worrying, which they can be. Some of the teachers may have experienced some not quite, not very nice things when they were at PE at school or within their school sport. When I was at school, there were teenagers when I was at secondary school that used to forge parents' letters to say that they couldn't take part in PE because of their previous experiences. This has a knock-on effect when you are a teacher. I didn't have a particularly great experience in some of my PE lessons at school, but I don't want that for the children that I teach, which is why when I teach PE, I'm enthusiastic. Even if you feel like there's imposter syndrome going on and you're quite worried about what's happening, and you're worried about modelling a skill correctly, you have to demonstrate that love of PE for your children. If you are quiet and if you are reserved and you are not demonstrating that you love the sport and you love PE and you're enthusiastic, the children won't either, just as they won't be with maths or English or writing, okay? Teachers' subject knowledge. So one of the barriers is that teachers don't always have the sport-specific subject knowledge that is needed. Now, I'm a PE specialist, but I do not have the knowledge in every single sport that I teach my children, okay? I do not have extensive knowledge of tennis, but what I do is I go away and I read up, I learn the key vocabulary, I plan, I read around the subject before I teach it to ensure that I am confident when teaching. Lots of people have a bit of a subject knowledge issue when it comes to gymnastics and dance. There is there's a wealth of resources out there that you could use for gymnastics support and for dance support. And I can guarantee that if you are not a gymnast or you are not a dancer, there will be one in your classroom. Okay, so you can use that child to model the particular skill that you're asking them to do. So for example, as I'm quite confident to model doing a forward roll, I've got other peers and colleagues that actually are not confident to model a forward roll when teaching. However, there are children in the class that know how to do that particular skill. So they will model whilst the teacher talks through the key points and the key knowledge that the child needs to do in order to be successful. The lack of time allocated to the curriculum. So the lack of time allocated to the curriculum is quite often a problem because PE gets squeezed out of the curriculum, particularly when it comes to Christmas performances and that sort of, you know, the second half of autumn term. Quite often PE is dropped for performance practice, or the hall is in use for other year groups to do that. But there are creative ways around that. You need to, one, ensure that it is timetabled and used well within the curriculum time. You know, 20 minutes for a PE lesson is not long enough, and we'll talk about why later. But you also need to ensure that it's a high priority. It's a high priority for your children because we know the benefits that PE and school sport has. So it must be on your priority list for your children. Another problem is that quite often there's not enough time spent on one concept. So there's too much variety. Previously, it was all about, you know, providing a breadth of activities, which it still is, for your children within the PE curriculum. And, you know, you do half a term of netball, followed by half a term of dance, followed by gymnastics, followed by half a term of something else. And in some cases, in some schools, the way the curriculum is designed actually means the children end up doing 12 different sports or activities within a year, which is far too much. We need to slim that down, and we need to be really conscious about where those skills could be transferred. So for example, striking and fielding, some of the skills can be transferred and applied into different areas of that strand. So you need to be creative about your curriculum. Again, that is down to the PE lead, but have that discussion with them about ensuring that there is enough balance within the curriculum, but not too much variety, that children do not have enough time to build upon their skills. Because if they don't have time to build upon those skills, they will never master them. And then it will become more tricky for them, more challenging, if they have to apply it in other areas of PE. Competition being introduced too early. I'm not talking about, you know, competition with yourself or competition within your peers, within your PE curriculum. It's those children that are 4 and 5, and there's nothing wrong with it, going to football tournaments and having pressure applied to them. Those children that have the pressure to perform and the pressure to continually perform at that level quite often get switched off from sport quite early, unless they're incredibly passionate about it. You need to be really careful when introducing competition into your sporting environment, into your PE lessons, that it is fair, it is consistent, but children understand that, you know, there are winners and there are losers. I'm a big advocate for that. However, that doesn't mean they can't improve and they can't get better. Because sometimes within competition, if a child loses, and they quite frequently lose, they will become switched off. And that is absolutely not what we need or want for our children when it comes to PE. Body image is huge. It's getting younger and younger each year where body image is becoming a bit of an issue. This might be where it comes to changing. So if schools are still changing within school, body image can quite often cause quite significant anxiety, particularly among young girls. But even if children are not changing in school for PE, if they feel self-conscious, they are not likely to want to perform at that level. Okay, so it's about their self-esteem. And children with SEND needs. Now, children with SEND needs are still able to participate in PE. They are still able to do the things that everybody else is doing, but it needs to be adapted to meet their individual learning needs. SEND can't, just as it is with reading, writing, maths, SEND can't be taken as a blanket approach across the PE curriculum. So not all SEND children have the same needs, so they need different provision within PE. So the reason, one of the other reasons PE is so important is the research done by the NHS. Now, The NHS say that there should be at least 60 minutes of physical activity for children and young people between 5 and 18 years old. Now, half of that should be in school. That doesn't just encompass your PE lessons, okay? It also encompasses your playground time, your golden mile time, and all those other things. However, if your PE curriculum is being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed into small chunks of time, that is going to impact the amount of time children are physically active within school. It's going to impact the amount of time children have to develop and refine those skills that they need in order to be successful for the next step in their journey. So it's really, really important. And there's some really good statistics there about on the NHS website and on the Change for Life website about why it is so important these children are physically active. National agendas. Now, currently, there is £16,000 sports premium given to all primary schools. This is, there is an additional £10 per pupil in Key Stage 1 and 2. This does not include foundation. So you don't get that £10 per pupil for the numbers of children you've got in foundation. This money is used to support the quality of PE that is taught in schools, tackle childhood obesity, which we know is on the increase and on the rise, even more so since COVID, and create those talent pathways to spot those children who are quite talented early on, make the links with local clubs and local sports groups, and ensure that they are on the correct pathway. But the key thing about this sports premium budget is it must be sustainable. So lots of schools have gone down the route of having a coach come in, which is great because coaches are brilliant. They have an extensive knowledge in their field, whether it's football or gymnastics or dance or cricket. They don't necessarily have that extensive knowledge in all of the curriculum subjects. If you're providing a coach, they should be used for CPD purposes. So if you currently have a coach being used in your school, my recommendation to you as RQTs is to go and team teach with that coach, because this budget will not be there forever. The coaches eventually, if it's not in your maintained budget, the coaches will go and then you will be the ones teaching that PE. So you need to now, while you've got that expertise in your school, make the most use of it. Spend time working alongside them, planning with them, doing the assessment with them, and really get to grips with PE, because you will need to teach it at some point. So there's been a very, very recent, as of Friday, Ofsted review around the subject of PE. And they've come up with these 3 pillars that are underpinning everything for progression. So the first pillar is motor competence. So that is their fundamental movement skills. That's being able to move effectively in the way they need to move to be successful in a particular activity. So it's broken down here into 3 further steps. So you've got locomotor skills, which is your running, your jumping, your skipping, all of those things. Stability, so twisting, balancing, and manipulation, so throwing and catching. The best time for children to learn these skills are between the ages of 3 and 8 years old. Now, if children get to 8 and they haven't mastered those fundamental skills, they are at a disadvantage to their peers when it comes to applying those skills into other contexts, okay? So if they haven't mastered throwing and catching by the time they are 8, they are going to really struggle when it comes to doing cricket when they move into in the end of lower key stage 2. They need to be proficient in these skills, which is why it's so important that the early years curriculum builds on this all the way through key stage 1, and the children have the chance and the opportunities to practice, refine and master these skills as they go along. The second area for progression is to ensure there are rules, tactics and strategies. Now, these have to be taught explicitly to children. It depends on the sport, it depends on the context as to what these strategies and rules look like. They are different between different concepts, which again, if you've got a really broad curriculum with a huge variety in it, is going to be very, very complex for these children, because rules do not apply exactly the same in all sports, okay? This is very, very closely linked to their motor competency. It will only happen, they will only be able to apply these rules, these strategies, these tactics, if they can do this successfully, if they can move their body in the way they need to move it, if they've mastered those key skills. And pillar 3 is a healthy participation in sport. Okay, if you introduce performance and competition too early, it can quite often have a detrimental effect. So if you're pushing a child to perform and pushing them to go and do something that actually they're not confident in, that has a detrimental effect to them longer term. Healthy competition between peers within PE lessons, absolutely great for Key Stage 1. There will be a slight element of that, you know, in Key Stage 2 with some external competition should they want to take part in that. But it's encouraging that, but not forcing the child. This also relies on a range of extracurricular and school-based physical activities. Okay, so things like the Golden Mile, things that like having a sports week or an Olympic athlete come in to enrich the curriculum. If they're engaged and they are hooked and they have this healthy participation and this want for sport and this want for PE, they are more likely to progress. Okay, we all know we can think of children within our settings, within our classrooms, those children that are not very confident in PE, and if you gave them the opportunity, actually they would want to shrink into the background and not join in. We need to, wherever possible, avoid that and ensure that these children are embracing the PE curriculum and embracing that participation for sport and healthy activity. So the next bit is going through the structure for a PE lesson. Okay, so changing is often the longest part. So the DfE, most recent DfE review stated that PE lessons should be active for between 50 and 80% of the allocated time that is given in the timetable. So if your PE lesson is an hour, those children should be moving for 50% to 80% of that. Okay, which does sound like a lot, but it is completely achievable. The problem that we have currently within schools is a post-COVID issue where children have not been as physically active as they usually are, and this is having quite a detrimental effect because they aren't able to be active for 50 to 80% of the time because they get out of breath, they're worried, they're panicking because their body, their heat, their heart rate, all of those things, it makes a big difference. Okay, so changing is the longest part. If you are spending 20 minutes changing, that means children have got, and you've got an hour PE lesson, that means children have got to be active still for 30 minutes. Well, really a bit more than that, it should be 40 to 45 minutes. They're not going to be able to achieve that because it doesn't give you time to give instruction. It doesn't give you time for them to reflect, to evaluate, and to perform those skills to others. If you can, I would always advise being a PE ready school. So we come in our PE kits as staff on the PE days, as do the children. There is no change in time needed. It means the full allocation of PE can be given to the children actually doing PE rather than changing. If you are a school that has to change for whatever reason, Key Stage 1 is quite often the most difficult and foundation, which I completely understand. Make it easier for yourself. So, for example, my foundation children will go into the hall. If we were still doing it this way, we are PE ready now. They would go into the hall. Each child would have a hoop spaced out around the edge of the hall. They would change in their hoop. All their clothes were in the hoop and they stayed in the hoop. This avoids lost jumpers, lost socks, lost shoes. It makes it much easier. Okay. If you don't have that facility, again, use a chair, get the children to put everything on their chair. And I know it sounds simple, but you will be surprised the number of children that need reminding to put their clothes and things on a chair. This makes it really quick and really easy. I've also used a timer with children. My foundation children a few years ago were getting changed for PE in 2.5 minutes. It is completely doable. Okay, using visuals with them on the timer is really, really good. So the lesson structure, we'll leave changing. We'll pretend that you don't have to get the children changed because they've come in PE ready. An active starter, followed by a warm-up. They will learn a skill, they'll apply the skill, they'll refine and evaluate the skill, and then there'll be a cool down before they come back to the classroom. And that cool down is really, really important because if children are not in the right frame of mind as they leave that hall to come back to the classroom, if it's in the afternoon, your afternoon is going to be very, very challenging. They need to be calm before they leave that hall. Okay. So active starters, some of you won't have heard of this before, but it's something that I do in every lesson that I teach when it comes to PE. Just like when you do flashback 4s in maths, or if you're doing a retrieval practice in English, it's exactly the same concept, but active with PE. So the minute the children enter the hall, they have got an active starter, which means that they are learning, they're doing from the onset of them being in that hall or out on the playground. So for example, in gymnastics, you could have shape cards put up around the hall of the shapes they'd learnt the previous week. The children have to walk to a shape, demonstrate that shape, and then hold it for 3, and then move to the next shape, okay? If in games you were practicing a throwing or catching skill, or a defending skill, or an attacking skill, allowing the children to spend a couple of minutes practicing that. This works particularly well with dance and with gymnastics, because you have to take shoes and socks off. Whilst you're waiting for children to take shoes and socks off, the other children are already learning, okay? It's a really, really simple thing to do. So once you've done that, you then move into obviously your warm-up, you teach the skill, you apply the skill, and you move through just as you would in any other lesson. If you want more information on the structure of a lesson, please just email me. I'm more than happy to ping that over to you and give you some examples. It's not a problem. Challenge and support. Now, in PE, it's very easy to go for the one-size-fits-all approach, and all children do exactly the same. Now, this doesn't work. It doesn't work for your children who are higher attaining when it comes to PE, although you should treat all children as novices when it comes to PE, because they may have learned a particular skill, but they won't have been able to apply it. And it may not be exactly what you're looking for. Always have something up your sleeve to give the children as an additional activity that makes it harder. Okay, because you're going to have those children, for example, if it's the first lesson of dance, you go into the hall, you start doing your activities, and suddenly you realise, oh my goodness, I've got a child in here that's done dance for 2 years and has never told anybody. And then she's, you know, not challenged throughout the lesson. Always have something up your sleeve. Provide visual cue cards and checklists to support children. It is no different to any other lesson, okay? Learning objectives and success criteria must be explicit in PE, and that is very clear in the latest Ofsted report. Children must know what they are learning and what they need to do in order to be successful, just like any other lesson. So you can do it in different ways. I've done it before where individual children, groups of children have had a little card with a checklist on that's just been printed out, or they've written it on a whiteboard. I've done it as a whole class. We've talked about the success criteria before we've gone off to do our activity, but it's really, really important that children have the opportunity to understand what they're learning and that they know how to be successful. Use of STEP. Now, we're going to go through STEP in a minute, but if you use STEP, it allows all children to be successful, because you can make the task easier or harder by just changing one of these simple things, okay? So STEP stands for space, task, equipment, and people. So you can change one of those things in your activity in order to make it more difficult, or to make it easier in order for the child to succeed. So for example, take the example of a goal. You can make it harder by using the space, so moving the goal narrower. You can make it easier by making the goal wider, so that's your space, okay? Changing the task, so changing the rules, changing the pathways, changing the sort of the demand on the children, what you're expecting from them. Changing the equipment, for example, Key Stage 1, really easy. Beanbag is easier to catch than a ball, okay? If children are throwing and catching with a beanbag and they're getting it 10 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, it's too easy. They need the next thing, okay? So think about the equipment that you are using, and is it appropriate for the child? And then the people. So for example, if you're doing an attacking and defending game, and you wanted to make it harder, you add more defenders, reduce the attackers. Other way around, if you wanted to make it easier, increase the attackers, reduce the defenders. This is a really, really easy concept, and children within year 1, once you've taught them how to use STEP, you introduce it as STEP and you tell them space, task, equipment, people, those children will be able to differentiate it. So if you're saying to the children, think about STEP, how can we make it harder? How can we make it easier? What could we do? My year 1 children can now say to me, oh, we can change this, we can change the equipment, we can change the ball for a beanbag to make it easier. Oh, I think I need more attackers on my team. Those sorts of things are really powerful for the children. And if year 1 children can do it, by the time they get to year 3, 4, 5, and 6, they should be experts at it. Don't be afraid of introducing it for those children. They will need guidance in Key Stage 1, but by the time they get to, you know, middle of Key Stage 2, they should be able to do that effectively and independently. As we've just talked about as well, pace is key. Okay, pace is really, really key for a good quality PE lesson. We know, as I said, DFE research has shown that it should be active in a PE lesson for 50 to 80% of the time that it is allocated on the timetable. There is no allocated time that legally you have to do PE for anymore, but the recommended time is that it's 2 hours of your curriculum. Okay. Children should be active from the start. That's your active starter. They should be coming into the hall. They should be doing what they need to do, recapping their learning from the previous lesson in order to then be successful in the next lesson. Children should not sit still for long periods of time. Children are not built to sit still, particularly Key Stage 1 and lower Key Stage 2 children and foundation children. You know, keep them moving. If you're giving them an instruction, there's nothing wrong with them marching on the spot and reciting the instruction to you. One, it keeps them active, but two, if they're reciting the same instruction that you're giving or the learning intention you're giving them, it's more likely to stick. It keeps the heart rate elevated after a warm-up, and it improves the fitness levels of the children. If you let that heart rate drop and then have to build it up again, the children's fitness levels don't really increase at the same speed. Please, whatever you do, don't do half do and half evaluate, because what happens with that is that you have half the class that are watching, some of which are going to be switched off and don't really want to do that because they want to actually do the activity and want to perform. And the children that are performing, you may have some really nervous children with really low self-esteem, anxiety, worries, and you're asking them to do something in front of a large group of their peers. That is going to be really daunting for them. You know, I was one of those children that struggled with that. My daughter struggles with it. I wouldn't want any child to be put in that position when they feel uncomfortable. So please do not do the half sit down, half perform and evaluate and then swap over. It's also a waste of lesson time because they're not actively doing anything. If you have iPads or tablets, use it to record. If you've got a child, for example, who's, you know, broken their arm, can't take part in PE, in the actual activity of PE, doesn't mean they can't take part in PE. They can take the iPad round, they can film, they can evaluate with the children, with their groups, they can take photographs, check against success criteria and make sure that they're actively involved in the lesson. Years ago, it used to be that if you didn't have your kit, you sat on the side with a reading book. That can't happen, okay? You need to be getting them actively involved. As I said, wherever possible, make sure you're using technology if you have it. I know it's not the case for all schools. The use of mini coaches in a lesson is really, really powerful. So one of the children or the group of children, one of them becomes a mini coach. They become like a mini teacher, a mini you. They can use the STEP method to challenge their peers, to extend their learning or to support them if needed. They can then mark off against success criteria, look at what's missing, and it makes your job as a teacher much easier when supporting other children, particularly if you've got children in Key Stage 1 or Foundation. If you've got reluctant learners when it comes to PE because of past experience or whatever it might be, this is a brilliant job for them to do because it automatically engages them. It gives them that sense of responsibility, and you will eventually get them joined in. But if you can get them doing this, this is a step in the right direction. So, top tips for a good PE lesson. Keeping children active. No passive learning, no sitting still for long periods of time. There are going to be times where they need to sit when you're giving them a series of instructions or you're giving them feedback, and that's fine, but you can't have them sat for long periods of time. Visual cards, checklists for children to refer to. Visual cards, particularly in things like gymnastics and dance, where there's shapes and jumps that the children need to learn. They are really, really good for children, particularly those children who have SEND needs or EAL needs. Ensure the children are clear on the outcomes from the start of the lesson. Ensure you share those intentions with them. Ensure you share the success criteria in order for them to be successful. As I've said before, really high quality modelling. Don't worry if you are not a gymnast. As I said before, there will be a child in your class that is, and you can use them to model whilst you talk through the technicalities of it. Keep lessons pacey and structured in that structure I showed you to support behaviours for learning. and use physical activity in the classroom to keep children engaged with sport and being physically active. So things like BBC Super Movers is really good. Go Noodles, another really good one. Just Dance, we do that quite a lot. So if you keep them physically active, they will enjoy the PE lessons a little bit more.
Thank you, that was fantastic.